In August 2010, I found myself in a small seaside village in Greece, a place where the pace of life slows to a gentle hum, especially during the summer. It's common in Greece for city folks to own summer homes or apartments in such villages, escaping the urban heat for weekends or longer stretches. These villages, though, are a world apart from the city. Streets often lack names or even asphalt, and houses rarely have numbers. It's a place that feels alive in the summer but turns ghostly quiet in the winter when only a handful of locals remain. My family owns a house there, complete with a large yard, and that's where this story unfolds. For context, I'm a guy, and I was spending a weekend at the house with two friends, let's call them Iris and Hera. It was a warm, starry night, and after a lazy day, we decided to head out for drinks at a beach bar located within a nearby university campsite. The bar was a lively spot, popular with students and visitors, about a 40-minute walk from the house. Before leaving, we locked the front gate and the doors, a habit born of caution in such a remote area. We set off around 11 p.m., the night air buzzing with the distant sound of waves and the occasional chirp of crickets. The walk was pleasant, the kind where you lose yourself in conversation, and the bar didn't disappoint. Music, laughter, and cold drinks kept us there until about 1 a.m. When we started heading back, the village was draped in quiet. The only sounds are footsteps crunching on the gravel path. A few minutes before we reached the turnoff from the main road to our street, we spotted a small dog trotting along the side of the path. He was scruffy, clearly a stray, but friendly enough. We stopped to play with him, tossing a stick and laughing as he bounded after it. Iris, who's always had a soft spot for animals, suggested we take him back to the house to give him some food or water. It seemed like a kind gesture. Stray dogs are common in rural Greece, often relying on scraps from locals or tourists. But as we turned toward the house, the dog suddenly stopped. Iris called to him, her voice soft and coaxing, but he wouldn't budge. He just stood there, staring down the path as if something had caught his attention. We shrugged it off, figuring he'd wander off on his own, and continued to the house. Once we got there, we locked the front gate behind us, a sturdy metal gate that creaked loudly when opened or closed, and went inside. The house felt warm and familiar, but the night's energy kept us restless. None of us could sleep, so we changed into comfortable clothes and decided to have a couple of drinks on the porch. The porch overlooked the yard, but the front gate was out of sight, hidden by a low wall and some overgrown bushes. For Americans, imagine a rural summer home, far from neighbors, where the darkness feels absolute at night, broken only by the glow of a few stars or a distant street lamp. We've been sitting there for about 20 minutes, sipping our drinks and chatting about nothing in particular, when we noticed movement in the yard. It was the same little dog from earlier, trotting toward us through the grass. How he'd gotten through the locked gate was a mystery, but we didn't think much of it at first. We called out to him, and Iris tossed him a bit of bread from the table. He came closer, wagging his tail, and we played with him for a moment. But then abruptly he froze. His body went rigid, his ears perked up, and he turned to face the direction of the front gate, staring into the darkness like a statue. Iris knelt beside him, petting his head and offering more food, but he didn't react. He just kept staring, his eyes fixed on something we couldn't see. We tried to brush it off and went back to our conversation, but the mood had shifted. The dog's behavior was unsettling, and the quiet of the night felt heavier now. Not long after, we heard something else, soft, deliberate steps crunching on the grass. My heart skipped a beat. We grabbed our phones and turned on the flashlights, sweeping the beams across the yard, but the light revealed nothing. No person, no animal, just the empty yard and the shadows of the bushes. The steps grew louder, closer, heading straight toward the porch. The dog let out a low, plaintive whine and took a step back, as if something was approaching him. My stomach churned. Hera, always the brave one, tried to coax the dog inside, but he wouldn't move. He stayed rooted to the spot, staring toward the gate. Now thoroughly freaked out, we scrambled inside the house. We locked every door, closed every shutter, and checked the windows, our hands shaking as we moved. Part of us wondered if we were overreacting. Maybe it was just a cat or a fox, though the steps had sounded heavier, more human. Still, we tried to rationalize it. The dog's whining outside grew louder, more desperate, and then it turned into a sharp, frantic bark. We froze. listening through the shutters. Suddenly, we heard a yelp, like the dog had been kicked, followed by a loud thud, as if it had been thrown against something. The barking stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Terrified, we called the police, knowing they were stationed in a village about 20 minutes away. Explaining our location was a challenge. Without street names or house numbers, we had to describe landmarks, like the turnoff from the main road and the big olive tree near the gate. While we waited, we grabbed kitchen knives, our fear pushing us to prepare for the worst. The house felt like a fortress under siege, and every creak made us jump. I crept to a small barred window, the only one we hadn't shuttered, and peered out. That's when we heard it, 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the shutters. My blood ran cold. We screamed, hoping to scare off whoever was out there, but there was no sound of footsteps retreating. It was as if the person was still standing there, silent, waiting. 10 agonizing minutes later, the police called to confirm our location. I gave them detailed directions, my voice trembling. As I glanced out the barred window again, I saw a dark, shadowy figure of a man standing in the yard. The dim moonlight made it hard to see his face clearly, but he was tall, motionless, just staring toward the house. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't scream, afraid to alert him that I'd seen him. The phone rang again, snapping me out of my trance. It was the police saying they were close. I told them exactly where to turn, and within a minute their car pulled up. The officers searched every inch of the house and yard for 15 minutes, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They found nothing. No man, no signs of a break-in, nothing disturbed except for one chilling detail. The front gate was wide open. The same gate we'd locked before leaving for the bar and again after returning home. The police offered to drive us back to the beach bar at the university campsite, and we didn't hesitate to accept. We grabbed our things and left, too shaken to stay. As we were leaving, I asked the officer how they'd gotten into the yard. He looked at me, puzzled, and said the gate was already open when they arrived. It hit me then, that must have been how the dog got in, too. The next morning, we returned to the house to pack up and leave. To our relief, the little dog was there, alive and well, standing just outside the gate. He wagged his tail when he saw us, as if nothing had happened. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted, but I can't shake the feeling that the dog had been staring at him the whole time, sensing something we couldn't. The memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine, a reminder of how close we came to something I can't quite explain. I've always carried a weight from my childhood, a sense that something wasn't quite right in our home. It started with my mother's pain, a grief that seemed to seep into the walls. After I was born, she suffered 2 miscarriages, each one a blow that left her fragile, both physically and emotionally. The fetuses, she told me later, were too underdeveloped to even determine their gender, just tiny, lost possibilities. The second miscarriage was particularly brutal. The nurses botched the procedure, failing to remove the dead fetus properly, and it nearly killed her. I was only 3 at the time, too young to grasp the gravity, but I remember the sterile hospital smell, the way my father kept me out of her room, saying it was too busy. Even now, those memories feel like fragments of a half-forgotten dream. My mother's relationship with my father was a storm of resentment. She never loved him, or at least that's what she says now. Her hatred for him was so fierce it felt like a living thing, a dark cloud that hung over our house. She once told me, in a moment of raw honesty, that she wished him dead. Not just in passing, but with chilling specificity. She pictured him dying in a horrific car accident while his mother was visiting family in England. It was as if she'd scripted his end. I was barely 4, just days past my birthday, when the police knocked on our door. They delivered the news. My father had died in a terrible car accident, exactly as my mother had wished. For Americans, imagine a small-town tragedy, the kind that shocks everyone but somehow feels inevitable. The precision of it, her wish mirrored in reality, shook her to her core. That event broke something in my mother. She spiraled into psychosis, a descent I was too young to fully understand. At 4, I didn't have the words for her unraveling, but looking back, I see it clearly. She was not equipped to raise a child alone, not in that state. She never abused me, not physically, but her mental absence left a void. There was no reason for anyone to intervene. No bruises, no overt neglect, so we carried on, just the two of us in a house that felt increasingly strange. I always noticed how my mother talked to herself. It wasn't just muttering. She held full conversations, her tone shifting as if she were speaking to different people. Sometimes she sounded like she was chatting with an adult, her voice calm and measured. Other times, it was softer, playful, like she was talking to a young child. I'd catch her in the morning, walking into an empty room, saying, "Good morning. Is everyone awake already?" Then she'd pause as if listening before asking, "Who's coming over today?" There were never any plans, no visitors, just her and the empty air. It was eerie, but as a kid, I grew used to it like you get used to a creaky floorboard or a flickering light. The last time I visited her, something clicked. I realized she was speaking to a little girl, a presence without a name. Out of curiosity or maybe unease, I asked her what she would have named a daughter if she'd had one after me. She looked at me, her eyes distant, and said, "I don't know. I only ever thought about having a boy after you." Her answer didn't satisfy me. It only deepened the chill I felt. The idea that she was conversing with a nameless child, one who might have been tied to those lost pregnancies, made my skin crawl. But her talking to herself wasn't the darkest part of our home. There was something else, something I've come to call the darkness in the house. It started with my mother's wish for my father's death, the way it came true with such precision. But it didn't stop there. I, too, made wishes into that darkness, and they came true in ways that haunt me still. The first time, I was 10, caught up in petty jealousy. A girl at school had landed a role in a musical, a part one desperately wanted. In a fit of childish spite, I wished something bad would happen to her. Later that week, she fell during rehearsal, breaking her wrist in a nasty accident. I told myself it was a coincidence, but the guilt gnawed at me. The second time was far worse. One night, when I was still young, I had a dream that felt more real than waking life. I was in a dark, oppressive place, surrounded by an overwhelming sense of dread. A voice, my own, yet not mine, spoke to me, cold and commanding. It said something horrible was coming for me, unless I chose someone else to take my place. Beside me, a shadowy figure, a young girl, whispered, "Why don't you pick your mom?" The suggestion horrified me, but in my fear, I almost agreed. Then a quieter voice inside me warned that I'd regret it. Instead, I chose my grandmother. My mother and grandmother had been estranged for over 15 years, their arguments so bitter that my mother had cut her out of our lives. We hadn't seen her in years. 2 weeks later, my aunt called. My grandmother was in the hospital, her condition dire. I rushed to see her, tears streaming down my face. She was so doped up on painkillers, she didn't recognize me. A few days later, she improved enough to go home, but it was a false hope. She relapsed, her health deteriorating rapidly. The doctors suspected a dangerous virus that was circulating at the time, so they isolated her. But tests ruled out the virus, and they couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. She grew weaker, unable to move, until she passed away 2 months later. Her body, they said, looked so ravaged that they kept the coffin closed at the funeral. The doctors never figured out what killed her. She'd been healthy before, no history of illness, until, out of nowhere, she withered away. All this after I'd wished that terrible thing onto her to spare myself. I'm convinced that whatever lingers in my mother's house is the source of this. It's not just her wishes or mine coming true. It's the way they happen with a cruel precision that defies chance. Whenever my mother or I wish harm on someone and truly mean it, it manifests, sometimes exactly as we imagined. The thought terrifies me. That house, that darkness, feels like a trap, a place where thoughts turn into reality in the worst possible way. I don't know what it is, but it's real, and it's still there waiting. My wife and I have been pouring our hearts into remodeling a house in a Texas city, a place over 60 years old that carried the weight of its history in every creak and crack. For the past year and a half since we moved in, it had been a labor of love and frustration, with endless repairs to make the space feel like home. The house stood in a quiet neighborhood, typical of small-town America, where streetlights cast long shadows and the nights were still. But outside elements, strange and unsettling, began to creep into our lives, turning our sanctuary into a place of unease. The first incident came at the tail end of winter, when the air was sharp and the ground was dusted with frost. To save on heating, we were sleeping in a small guest room, huddled close to an electric heater that hummed softly. The room had a window facing the side of the house, offering a slanted view of the road out front. Old, yellowed blinds hung over the glass, their slats warped with age. For Americans, picture a classic suburban home, the kind you'd see in a 1950s postcard, but worn down by decades of sun and neglect. It was around 3 a.m. when I jolted awake, my heart racing. A man's voice was screaming outside over and over, and it sounded eerily like my name. I suffer from sleep paralysis, a condition where I sometimes hear things that aren't there just as I'm waking up, whispers, footsteps, or distant calls. Knowing this, I lay still for a few seconds, trying to separate dream from reality. But the screams didn't fade. They were real, piercing the quiet of the night. My pulse hammered as I slid out of bed, careful not to wake my wife, and crept toward the window. I parted the dusty blinds just enough to peek out, my breath fogging the cold glass. The street was bathed in the dirty orange glow of a street lamp, casting long shadows across the pavement. "Help me! Help me!" the voice shouted, each cry sounding more desperate, the word hello twisting into something that mimicked my name. My eyes locked onto a dark figure power walking down the street, his head turned toward our house. He was staring right at it, his movements jerky but deliberate. As he veered onto our lawn, my stomach dropped. I bolted to the front door, double-checking the lock, then grabbed a heavy prying bar from the toolbox in the hall. My phone was in my other hand, my finger hovering over the call button for 911. Peering through the peephole, I saw him approach from the right, getting closer to the porch. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the screaming stopped. The silence was deafening, but it didn't last. I heard the faint rustle of grass and leaves near the front door, as if someone was moving just outside. My heart thudded so loudly I was sure it could be heard. I looked again through the peephole, but saw nothing, just the empty porch and the dark yard beyond. Terrified, I whispered to the 911 operator that someone might need help on our street, or worse, was trying to break in. I clutched the prying bar, waiting for the door handle to jiggle or for footsteps to retreat. Neither happened. Time stretched on, each second an eternity, until the police arrived, their headlights cutting through the night. I recounted the story to the officers, my voice shaky. They searched the street and our property, but found no one. No footprints, no signs of disturbance, just an empty, quiet night. The incident left me rattled, but we chalked it up to a transient, or maybe my sleep paralysis playing tricks. Still, the memory of that voice screaming my name lingered like a bad dream. Fast forward to July 12, 2017, another sleepless night at 3 a.m. We'd moved to the room next to the guest room, its window just a few feet closer to the street and overlooking the garbage cans by the curb. The Texas summer was oppressive, even at night, and I was propped up in bed, reading about the Paris catacombs on my phone to pass the time. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the air conditioner. Then I heard it, a rustling sound coming from the garbage cans outside. My first thought was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a stray cat scavenging for scraps. But the noise was too heavy, too deliberate, accompanied by low, guttural grunts that didn't sound like any animal I knew. Curious but cautious, I eased out of bed and approached the window. The blinds were down, but I could see through the slats. A large, dark shape was hunched over the cans, one of them knocked over, its contents spilling onto the grass. The figure was rummaging frantically, plastic bags crinkling under its hands. It looked almost like a bear cub, but that made no sense. Black bears weren't common in our area. The grunts grew louder, more human, and my confusion turned to unease. I decided to scare it off, whatever it was. Slowly, I pulled a string to raise the blinds, keeping my eyes on the shape. As the blinds lifted, I banged hard on the window, shouting, "Hey!" The dogs went berserk, barking wildly from their spot at the foot of the bed. My wife stirred, startled awake. But what happened next froze me in place. The figure wasn't an animal. It was a fully grown man, hunched low, with a pronounced limp. He scrambled to his feet, still crouched, and scurried off into the darkness around the corner of the street. The speed of his retreat, despite the limp, was unnerving. I stood there, my heart pounding, trying to process what I'd just seen. My wife, now fully awake, asked what was happening, her voice tight with fear. I told her about the man, my words stumbling over each other. It could have been a homeless person, I reasoned, someone desperate for food or recyclables. But the way he moved, the grunts, the sheer size of him, it didn't sit right. And then there was the winter incident, the man screaming my name, eyeballing our house. The two events felt connected, though I couldn't say how. The coincidence gnawed at me, a nagging sense that our home was being watched. I checked the doors and windows again that night, the prying bar still close at hand. Sleep didn't come easy, and when it did, it was fitful, haunted by the image of that limping figure vanishing into the dark. The next morning, the garbage can was still tipped over, trash scattered across the lawn. I cleaned it up, my eyes scanning the street for any sign of him. The police, when I called later, took a report but found nothing, just like before. The house felt different after that, less like a home and more like a place under siege. Those nights in Texas, marked by screams and shadows, left a mark on me, a reminder that even in a quiet neighborhood, the darkness can hold something sinister. About 6 years ago, when I was in middle school, I lived in a quiet, pleasant neighborhood in a small Midwest town, the kind of place where kids ride bikes until dusk and everyone knows their neighbors. For Americans, picture a classic suburban street with tidy lawns and a patch of woods at the end of the block, wild enough to feel like an adventure, but close enough to home to feel safe. Those woods were our playground, crisscrossed with two narrow trails that led to a hidden meadow, a perfect spot for kids like me to escape and feel free. My friends and I loved wandering through there, imagining ourselves as explorers in some untamed wilderness. One early evening, I decided to show 3 friends, Jason, Jaden, and Zach, the meadow I'd found, hoping to share the thrill of discovery. It was late afternoon, the sun dipping low, casting golden light through the trees. The air was warm, typical of a Midwest summer, with crickets starting to hum. We were in high spirits, joking and shoving each other as we entered the woods. Instead of sticking to the familiar trails, we decided to venture off-path, weaving through the dense underbrush, our sneakers crunching on leaves and twigs. It felt like an adventure, the kind of carefree fun you chase in middle school. We stumbled across a small, rickety treehouse, probably built by older kids years ago. It was weathered, with splintered boards and a rope ladder that looked ready to snap, but we climbed it anyway, laughing and daring each other to go higher. We messed around up there for a while, tossing pine cones and pretending we were pirates or outlaws. Eventually, I suggested we head to the meadow, eager to show them the open clearing where wildflowers grew, and you could lie on your back and watch the sky. We climbed down from the treehouse, still buzzing with energy, and started pushing through the trees toward the clearing. We were still a good distance from the meadow when I froze. There, standing among the trees, was a figure facing us. At first, I thought it was just another hiker, maybe a local out for a walk. But something about him felt off. He was too still, his posture rigid, like a statue planted in the forest. I couldn't make out his face from where we stood. My eyes weren't great at judging distances back then, but he looked like a man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothes that blended into the shadows. I stopped the group, my voice low. "Guys, no one's usually here. Let's go." My gut was telling me to turn back, a prickling unease I couldn't shake. Before we could move, the figure turned toward us, and my heart stopped. His eyes were pitch black, not just dark but completely void, like 2 holes in his face. And his smile, God, that smile, was the creepiest thing I'd ever seen, wide and unnatural, stretching across his face like it didn't belong there. It wasn't a smile of joy or amusement. It was something else, something wrong. My friends saw it too, and the air between us shifted from excitement to raw fear. Jaden was the first to break the silence. "Guys, we should run," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. We didn't need convincing. We bolted, crashing through the underbrush, branches snagging at our clothes. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, my legs pumping as fast as they could. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear the sound of something moving behind us. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, too close for comfort. I yelled to the group, "Stick together, terrified that we'd get separated in the chaos. The thing, whatever it was fast, unnaturally fast. We'd had a head start, a good distance between us, but it was right on our heels, closing the gap in seconds. No normal person could move like that, not through the tangled mess of the woods. We kept running, dodging trees, our breaths ragged. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening, but all I could focus on was getting out. Finally, we burst out of the woods onto the edge of our neighborhood, collapsing onto the grass to catch our breath. We thought we were safe, just for a moment, until Zach's voice cut through the panting. "Guys, where's Jason?" My stomach dropped. Jason was gone. We looked around, frantic, scanning the tree line, but he was nowhere in sight. Panic set in, a cold, clawing fear that whatever had chased us had gotten him. Jaden, his voice shaking, said, "We gotta go back and find him." I wanted to agree, but every fiber of my being screamed to run home, to get as far from those woods as possible. I was terrified, my body trembling from adrenaline and dread. Still, we couldn't leave Jason behind. We were about to head back, steeling ourselves against the fear, when Jason suddenly appeared, stepping out from the trees like he materialized out of thin air. "What's up?" he asked, his voice casual, as if nothing had happened. We exploded at him, a mix of relief and anger, yelling about where he'd been, why he disappeared. "Where the hell did you go?" I demanded, my voice louder than I meant it to be. But Jason just shrugged, his expression blank, offering no real answer. He seemed shaken, but he wouldn't say anything more. We were just glad to have him back, so we brushed it off and got out of there as fast as we could, practically sprinting back to the safety of our street. The relief of being out of the woods was overwhelming, but the fear lingered. Strangely, after that night, our group drifted apart. We never hung out together again, never even talked much. The woods, once our playground, became a place of bad vibes and worse memories. A year ago, I ran into Jason and brought up that day, asking if he remembered what happened when he disappeared. His face went pale, and after a long pause, he admitted he didn't know how he'd gotten separated. He said he was just as freaked out thinking about it, that he couldn't remember anything from the moment we started running until he popped up again. His words sent a chill through me, like the woods had taken something from him, or left something behind. I've refused to set foot in those woods since that evening. The memory of that man, or whatever he was, with his black eyes and unnatural smile, still haunts me. The way he chased us, moving faster than humanly possible, defies explanation. Those woods, once a place of adventure, now feel like a boundary I'll never cross again, a place where something dark waits, just out of sight. I've always been sensitive to the strange, like I'm tuned into a frequency most people can't hear. My house, a modest suburban home in a quiet American neighborhood, has been the backdrop for some unsettling experiences. For context, imagine a typical middle-class house, the kind you find in any small town across the U.S., with a cozy living room upstairs and a basement that's half-finished, perfect for a man cave setup. That's where I spend most of my time when my wife and daughters are out, surrounded by my TV, a worn-out couch, and a mini fridge. The basement has thin flooring, so thin you can hear every creak and step from upstairs, like a pin dropping on a hardwood floor. It's my retreat, but it's also where things get weird, especially when I'm alone. This particular incident, one of the most recent and chilling, happened not too long ago. I was down in the basement, sprawled on the couch, watching TV with my dog, a loyal mutt named Luna, curled up on my lap. She's usually calm, her warmth a comfort as I zone out to some late-night show. The house was empty. My wife and daughters were out, leaving just me and Luna in the quiet. It was one of those nights where the world feels still. The only sounds the hum of the TV and the occasional car passing outside. Suddenly, Luna stirred. She lifted her head, hopped off my lap, and trotted to the base of the basement stairs, her ears perked. She sat there, staring up into the darkness of the stairwell. It wasn't completely unusual. She often does this when she hears someone at the front door, her way of signaling a visitor. I waited, expecting a knock or the doorbell's chime, but nothing came. The silence stretched on, and I called out to her. "Come on, girl, back to the couch." She glanced at me, her eyes catching the glow from the TV, then turned back to the stairs, her gaze fixed. A prickle of unease ran through me. but I brushed it off, figuring she'd heard a squirrel or a neighbor's cat. I reached for the remote to turn up the volume, hoping to drown out the quiet. Then it came, a loud, unmistakable bang from upstairs. It wasn't a subtle sound like a book falling off a shelf. It was heavy, deliberate, like something being slammed to the floor. Luna shot to her feet, barking furiously, her voice echoing in the basement's concrete walls. My heart jumped, and I shushed her, trying to calm her down. "Quiet, girl," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I picked her up, her small body tense in my arms, and set her on the couch. She stopped barking but kept growling low in her throat, her eyes never leaving the stairwell. My pulse quickened. I wasn't scared yet, but the alarms in my head were starting to ring. I grabbed a flashlight from the side table and headed upstairs to investigate, Luna trailing close behind, still growling softly. The main floor was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of street lamps through the windows. I moved through the kitchen, checking the back door locked. Then I stepped into the living room, and my breath caught. The kids' toy bin, a heavy plastic container we kept against the wall, was tipped over. Toys were scattered across the floor, not just in a pile but spread out, some even trailing down the hallway toward my daughter's room. This wasn't a simple spill. The bin was sturdy, filled with blocks, dolls, and stuffed animals, too heavy for a gust of wind or a pet to knock over. And the toys down the hall? That made no sense at all. A chill crept up my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe one of the girls had left it like that before they went out, though I couldn't imagine how. I checked the front door locked with the deadbolt in place. The windows were secure, too. Nothing seemed out of place except the toys. Shaking my head, I started picking them up, stacking them back in the bin as quickly as I could. My hands were trembling, but I told myself it was nothing, just a fluke. I got everything cleaned up and headed back downstairs, Luna still on edge, her ears twitching at every sound. I'd barely settled back onto the couch, the TV's glow casting shadows on the walls, when I heard it, footsteps. Not just one set, but multiple, like a group of kids running back and forth in the girls' room upstairs. The sound was unmistakable, a rapid patter of small feet, too heavy for a single person, too chaotic for anything but a group. My heart lurched, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I froze, listening, hoping I was imagining it. Luna's growling grew louder, her body rigid as she stared at the stairs again. I wanted to believe it was nothing, but the house's security system was armed. No one could have gotten in without setting off the alarm. I stood, my legs shaky, determined to check again. I needed to be sure it wasn't an intruder, though deep down, I knew the alarm would have caught anyone breaking in. As I reached the first step of the basement stairs, the footsteps stopped. Then, before I could move, the door at the top of the stairs, the one separating the basement from the main floor, slammed open and shut with a force that rattled the walls. The sound was so loud, so violent, it felt like a punch to the chest. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, my flashlight shaking in my hand. That door was heavy, with a spring hinge that made it close slowly, not slam like that. Then came the worst part. Footsteps started again, this time running down the stairs toward me. I was at the bottom, gripping the railing, my eyes wide in the dark. I couldn't see anything, no shapes, no shadows, but I felt it, a rush of cold air, sharp and forceful, like something had barreled past me. It wasn't a breeze, it was heavy, almost knocking me back, as if an invisible presence had brushed by at full speed. My skin prickled, and my knees nearly buckled. I didn't have the courage to go up those stairs, not then. Instead, I stumbled back to the couch, my heart hammering, and cranked the TV volume as high as it would go, trying to drown out the fierce screaming in my head. I sat there, Luna pressed against me, her growling quieter now, but still constant. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that I was going crazy, but the cold air, the slammed door, the scattered toys, they were too real. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to check the house again. Every door, every window, every lock was secure. The alarm hadn't been tripped. Nothing was out of place, except the memory of that moment burned into my mind. I don't know what's in this house, but it's something. I'm terrified to dig deeper, afraid that if I poke at it, it'll flare up, become something worse. My wife and daughters are my priority, and the thought of this thing, whatever it is, touching their lives keeps me up at night. I've read about hauntings, about houses carrying the weight of past tragedies, but I found no record of anything terrible happening here. No deaths, no dark history. So why does it feel like something's watching, waiting, just out of sight? All I know is that when I'm alone in that basement, I'm never truly alone. 8 years ago, my family and I took one of our regular trips to the Smoky Mountains, a tradition we cherished for its quiet beauty and the chance to unplug. We rented a cozy cabin near Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, nestled among towering pines and rolling hills. For Americans, picture a classic mountain getaway, the kind advertised in travel brochures with log cabins, hot tubs, and fireplaces, perfect for family bonding. This particular cabin was charming but isolated, surrounded by dense forest, with a gravel road winding up to it. It came equipped with a security system, a modern touch that felt reassuring in such a remote spot. We arrived after dark, the sky a deep velvet studded with stars. The drive had been long, and we were eager to settle in. My father set the alarm system as soon as we unpacked, its soft beep confirming the house was secure. The cabin had 3 levels, a basement where my father slept, the main floor with the kitchen and living area where I stayed, and an upper loft where my mother slept. My father's snoring was legendary, loud enough to shake the walls, so we spread out to get some peace. After dinner, we decided to watch a movie together in the living room, sprawled on the plush couch with popcorn and blankets. The glow of the TV filled the room, and for a while, everything felt perfect. Halfway through the movie, the alarm blared, a shrill wail that jolted us upright. My heart raced as the sound echoed through the cabin. The system was designed to go off only if a door or window was opened, so we immediately assumed someone had tried to get in. My father grabbed a flashlight and checked every door, front, back, basement, all locked tight. We searched the main floor and upstairs, peering into closets and under beds, but found nothing out of place. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry. The alarm had stopped by then, leaving an uneasy silence. We chalked it up to a glitch, but the mood was broken, and we went to bed soon after, the forest outside feeling a little too close. The next morning, I called the rental company to report the issue. They sent a technician, a gruff older man, who inspected the system with a practiced frown. He told us he'd been called out to this cabin multiple times in the past month for the same problem, random alarms with no apparent cause. His words stuck with me, a nagging sense that something wasn't right. While he worked, I noticed a guest book on the coffee table, a leather-bound journal where visitors left notes about their stay. Most entries gushed about the views or the hot tub, but as I flipped through, I found several that were less cheerful. Guests mentioned feeling unsafe or watched. One entry described finding a wet footprint on the deck near the hot tub, with no explanation for how it got there. I showed the book to my parents, half expecting them to be as creeped out as I was, but they laughed it off. People love telling spooky stories to scare the next guests, my mother said, rolling her eyes. My father nodded, saying it was probably just kids messing around. I wanted to believe them, so I pushed the unease aside and went about our day, hiking, exploring Pigeon Forge, enjoying the trip. That night, we went to bed as usual, each of us retreating to our separate floors. My room on the main floor was right off the kitchen, with a single window overlooking the dark forest. I fell asleep quickly, lulled by the quiet of the mountains. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of the fridge door closing, a soft thud followed by the hum of the motor. The kitchen was just outside my bedroom, and a sliver of light from the fridge spilled under my closed door, right in the otherwise dark room. I lay still, watching as the light flickered, the door opening and closing repeatedly, like someone was standing there, undecided. I assumed it was one of my parents rummaging for a late-night snack, maybe my mother grabbing a drink, or my father hunting for leftovers. The fridge light kept flashing on and off as the door moved. I considered getting up to join them, picturing a quiet moment sharing a snack in the kitchen. But something held me back, a faint unease, a feeling that the house wasn't as empty as it should be. The light finally went out, the fridge door staying closed, and I heard footsteps moving away from the kitchen. They were slow, deliberate, crossing the hardwood floor toward the stairs leading to my mother's loft. The steps paused for a moment, then started climbing, creaking softly under the weight. I figured it was my mother heading back to bed, so I rolled over, ready to drift off again. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and the cabin fell silent. I didn't think much of it then and fell back asleep, the incident fading into the haze of half-sleep. The next morning, I wandered into the kitchen, the smell of coffee filling the air. My mother was at the counter, slicing fruit for breakfast. I leaned against the fridge, casual, and asked, "So, what did you decide to eat last night?" She looked at me, puzzled. "What?" I explained how I'd heard her in the kitchen around 2 a.m., opening and closing the fridge, then heading back upstairs. Her face changed, a flicker of confusion crossing her eyes. "I thought that was you," she said slowly. She told me she'd woken up around the same time and seen me standing at the top of the stairs to her loft. She assumed I was sleepwalking, a habit I'd had on and off as a kid, because I'd looked at her blankly before turning and going back downstairs. My stomach twisted, a sick feeling spreading through me. I hadn't left my room. I wasn't sleepwalking. I'd been in bed, listening to those footsteps, assuming they were hers. We stared at each other, the realization sinking in that neither of us had been in the kitchen or on the stairs. The air felt heavy, the cozy cabin suddenly too small, too exposed. I tried to laugh it off, saying maybe it was my father, but we both knew his snoring would have given him away. He was still asleep in the basement, oblivious to the night's events. The rest of the trip, I couldn't shake the fear. I refused to sleep alone, dragging my mattress up to the loft to stay with my mother. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle outside, set my nerves on edge. Nothing else happened, no more alarms or footsteps, but the damage was done. The cabin felt wrong, like we were intruders in a space that didn't want us there. We left today early, eager to put distance between us and that place. A couple of months later, my father mentioned he was looking to book another cabin for our next trip. Out of curiosity, he checked on the one we'd stayed in and found it was no longer available to rent. He dug a little deeper, calling the rental company and poking around online. What he learned chilled us. The cabin had been closed permanently due to repeated guest complaints. Some reported feeling unsafe, others swore they saw or heard someone in the house who shouldn't have been there. A few even left mid-vacation, refusing to stay another night. The stories mirrored our own too closely to dismiss. I don't know what my mother and I experienced that night. Was it a trick of the mind, amplified by the isolation of the mountains? Or was something else in that cabin, moving through the dark, opening doors, watching us? All I know is we weren't the only ones who felt it. The Smoky Mountains are beautiful, but that cabin, tucked away in the pines, holds a darkness I'll never forget. I was 12 years old when it happened, living in an isolated seaside city surrounded by the vast, whispering expanse of the boreal forest. This was a remote place, a 2-hour drive from the nearest big town, where the air smelled of salt and pine, and the winters were brutal. For Americans, imagine a small coastal town in Alaska or northern Maine, cut off from the world, where the community is tight-knit but rough around the edges. The city was a mix of a fading mining town and an Indian reservation, a place where poverty and hardship bred a raw edge, violence, theft, and substance abuse were part of the fabric. As a kid, you learned to keep your wits about you, even in a place that felt like home. Up until 4th grade, I went to a small school just 2 streets away from my house, about a 200-meter walk through quiet, familiar lanes. But that school didn't offer 5th grade, so that year I started taking the school bus for the first time. Every morning at 6 a.m., I'd leave my house and walk a few blocks to a long street with several intersections. Our bus stop was about 100 meters ahead of another stop, where 3 of us, me and 2 other kids, would wait. The bus would pick us up, loop around an intersection to grab other students, then come back to get us. It always seemed pointless to have 2 stops so close together, so sometimes when we were feeling lazy or wanted to get on early, we'd walk the extra distance to the earlier stop. That morning, a heavy snowstorm was raging, the kind that stings your face and turns the world into a white blur. I left the house early, knowing the wind would slow me down. The cold was biting, my breath puffing out in clouds as I trudged through the snow, my bright pink hat pulled low over my ears. The temperature was so low that small patches of frostbite formed on my cheeks, tiny spots of hardened, stinging skin that hurt like hell when they started to warm up later. Frostbite is common in places like this, where winter is unrelenting, but it's never pleasant. Wanting to get out of the cold as soon as possible, I headed straight for the earlier bus stop, the one before the intersection, hoping to catch the bus sooner and warm up inside. For a few minutes, I stood alone, the world reduced to the howl of the wind and the sharp prick of snowflakes against my face. The street was empty, the other kids probably still at home, checking the news for a snow day announcement. I touched my cheeks, feeling the numb, frozen patches, and shivered, pulling my coat tighter. Then, through the veil of snow, I saw headlights. An old gray car turned the corner, moving at an unnervingly slow pace toward me. My heart started to pound as I noticed the driver, a man with a weathered, dirty look, staring right at me from the driver's seat. He passed by, his eyes locked on mine, then pulled over into the bike lane just ahead. I stood frozen on the opposite side of the street, watching him, my mind racing. What is he doing, idling in a snowstorm at 6 a.m., blocking the bike lane? I had slight vision problems back then, undiagnosed at the time, so I squinted hard to make out details. That's when I saw it. He was holding something in his left hand, pointed directly at me. It was a camera, held sideways in a strange, awkward grip, like he was snapping a photo of me. Panic surged through me, my muscles locking up as fear took hold. Why was this man taking my picture? My breath came in short, heavy gasps, the cold air burning my lungs. I realized I was too far from home to run back. 200 meters might as well have been a mile in that storm. The houses around me were dark, their doors locked, the neighborhood still asleep. I was alone, exposed, and if he decided to come for me, there was no one to help. My body refused to move, paralyzed by fear, as the car began to creep forward again, turning onto my side of the street. It moved so slowly, deliberately, like a predator stalking prey. I screamed at myself to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The car slowed even more as it neared my stop, and I felt my vision blur, my head spinning with the threat of passing out. Just then, a loud humming broke through the storm. A second car appeared, its headlights piercing the snow like a lifeline. The gray car's driver slammed on the gas, tires screeching as he sped off at full speed, disappearing into the white haze. Seconds later, one of my stop mates arrived, a girl whose name I can't recall now, but whose presence felt like salvation. I found my courage and ran toward her, my legs finally unsticking from the ground. I was shaking, my heart still racing, but I didn't tell her what had happened, not then. The bus came soon after, and I climbed aboard, huddling in my seat, trying to warm my frostbitten cheeks and calm my nerves. That day, I called the police from home, my voice trembling as I described the man, the car, the camera. They promised to patrol the area more often, but in the 5 years that followed, I never saw a single patrol car in our neighborhood. The memory of that man's stare, the click of his camera, stayed with me, a shadow that never quite faded. 2 years later, the news hit like a punch to the gut. The body of a 5-year-old girl, abducted from our town, was found in the nearby woods. I'll never know if that man in the gray car was connected to her death, but the thought makes my blood run cold. Every time I think of that morning, I see his face, those eyes fixed on me through the snow. The picture he took, where is it? Deleted? Hanging in some creep's collection? Or worse, floating around on some twisted corner of the internet? I don't know. But I do know this. If that second car hadn't shown up, if the timing had been just a little different, I might not be here to tell this story. The thought of a chubby 12-year-old in a bright pink hat, standing alone in a snowstorm with frostbitten cheeks, captured in some stranger's photo, still haunts me. If you ever stumble across that image online, now you know the terror behind it. Last summer, I embarked on a 3-week hitchhiking adventure through the Balkans, traveling solo as a young woman. For Americans, picture a journey through rugged, scenic countries like those in the former Yugoslavia, where winding roads connect small towns and vibrant cities, and hitchhiking is a common way to get around, especially for budget travelers. I'd always been fearless, confident in my ability to handle whatever came my way, and the drivers I met were mostly kind. Some even bought me food or water, their concern for my safety touching but unnecessary. I'd had 22 rides across 5 countries, each one a story of connection and kindness, until the last days of my trip, when things took a dark turn. I want to defend hitchhiking. It's not as dangerous as people think, and this one bad experience shouldn't overshadow the beauty of it. I've been meaning to write about all my rides in a blog, but for now, this is the story of the one that went wrong. It was a crisp morning, and I was walking to a gas station just outside a small town, my backpack slung over one shoulder. I'd woken up with a strange feeling, a knot of unease in my stomach, but I brushed it off as fatigue from weeks on the road. My plan was to hitch a ride to my next destination, a city a few hours away. At the gas station, I approached couples and families first, asking if they were headed my way. It's a safer bet to ask groups, especially with women or kids, but that morning, luck wasn't on my side. No one was going my direction, so I did what I'd done countless times before. I stood by the road, raised my thumb, and waited. Almost immediately, a car pulled over. The driver, a middle-aged man with a greasy smile, leaned out and asked if I'd sleep with him for the ride. I recoiled, my skin crawling, and firmly said no. He lingered for 5 minutes, trying to coax me with sleazy promises. I held my ground until he finally drove off. I barely had time to catch my breath when another car stopped, this one with 2 guys inside. They didn't proposition me outright, but their stares, cold, predatory, made my blood run cold. I waved them off, my heart pounding, and they sped away, leaving a cloud of dust. Then a red van pulled up. The driver was young, good-looking, with a warm smile that seemed genuine. He looked trustworthy, the kind of guy you'd meet at a cafe and swap travel stories with. Relieved, I hopped in, grateful for a break from the creeps. For the first 30 minutes, the ride was fine. We made small talk, where I was from, where I'd been, the usual road chatter. He seemed friendly, asking about my trip with what felt like real interest. But then the conversation shifted. He started talking about sex, his tone casual but invasive, commenting on my appearance in a way that made my stomach churn. I asked him to stop, my voice firm, trying to keep things civil. "I'm not comfortable with this," I said, hoping he'd back off. Instead, he laughed, calling me a cold woman and telling me to relax. He went on, saying I was hot and joking about how he was bursting with desire. My patience snapped. "Stop talking about that," I said, my tone sharp. "I'm not a prostitute, and I'm not here for that. If you can't respect that, let me out now." He went quiet, his face serious, and nodded. "Fine, I'll take you to your destination," he said, his voice flat. An awkward silence settled over us for the next 10 minutes, the hum of the engine the only sound. I stared out the window, watching the Balkan countryside roll by, hills dotted with sheep, small villages tucked into valleys, trying to calm my nerves. Then, out of nowhere, he spoke again. "Say something. I picked you up to entertain me." His words sent a chill down my spine. The ride was turning sour and fast. I stayed silent, my mind racing for a way out. We stopped at a roadside diner soon after, a small place with picnic tables and a flickering neon sign. I considered staying there, finding another ride, but the place was packed with men, no women in sight, and their stares felt just as threatening as the driver's. They weren't friendly looks. They were hungry, sizing me up like I was something to claim. I decided to stick with the driver, hoping his earlier seriousness meant he'd behave. It was a gamble, but I felt trapped. Back in the van, we drove for 5 minutes before he started talking again, this time about an eco-village, just 5 kilometers off the highway. "It's a cool place," he said, his smile back but forced. "You'd love it. Let's go check it out." I refused, politely at first, then more firmly as he kept pushing. "No, I just want to get to my destination," I said, my voice steady despite the fear creeping in. He ignored me, making the turn onto a narrow mountain road. My heart sank as I saw the sign for the eco-village, a small wooden marker half hidden by trees. I realized he wasn't going to stop unless I forced the issue. Anger and fear surged through me. I grabbed my backpack from the floor, my hand shaking, and flung open the passenger door while the van was still moving slowly. "Stop," I shouted, but he didn't. I jumped out, landing hard on the gravel, my knees stinging from the impact. The van kept going, but I knew he'd turn around soon. I had to move. I spotted a woman working in a nearby field, her back bent as she tended to crops. I ran toward her, my breath ragged, and stood in front of her, hoping my presence would deter him. Sure enough, the red van reappeared, slowing as it passed by. He stopped for a few seconds, staring at me, then drove off toward the highway, disappearing into the distance. I was safe, but the danger wasn't gone. My hands were trembling, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my chest. I started walking toward the eco-village, a cluster of wooden cabins and communal gardens that, in another context, might have seemed charming. For Americans, think of a small, off-grid community like a hippie commune, but with a Balkan twist, rustic, isolated, and tight-knit. I needed a moment to collect myself, so I headed for the public restroom near the entrance. A woman stopped me, politely asking if I'd paid the entrance fee. I was on the verge of tears, my voice breaking as I explained I just needed the bathroom. She nodded, letting me pass, and I slipped inside, locking the door behind me. In the quiet of the restroom, the weight of what had happened hit me. I sank to the floor, crying, my body shaking with shock and relief. I tried to calm myself, splashing cold water on my face, but the fear lingered. When I stepped out, the woman was still there, her expression concerned. I tried to tell her what had happened, but the words came out in sobs. She led me to her boss, a kind-looking woman in her 50s who reminded me of a mother figure. In her small office, I poured out the story, crying as I described the driver, the van, the terrifying detour. She listened, her face soft with sympathy, then took me out a back door. I thought she was helping me find safety, but her next words stunned me. "Call the police, darling," she said, her voice firm. "You're not welcome here." The door slammed shut in my face. I stood there, dumbfounded, tears streaming down my cheeks. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her she was heartless, that tomorrow it could be her daughter in my place. If that driver was waiting for me down the road, her dismissal could cost me everything. But I was too shaken to fight. I started the 5-kilometer walk back to the highway, the road empty and lined with sparse trees. My hands shook as I gripped my backpack, my eyes scanning for the red van. At one point, I saw a man loading his car, his kids playing nearby. Desperate, I begged for a lift to the highway, but he brushed me off, telling me to walk. I considered calling the police, but I didn't know the local emergency number, and after my experience at the eco-village, I didn't trust anyone to help. The walk was terrifying, every rustle in the bushes making me jump, my heart racing at the thought of the van reappearing. But it never did. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the highway, my legs aching, my body trembling with relief. A bus stop stood nearby, a stroke of luck I hadn't expected. I waited an hour, digging into my emergency cash to buy a ticket, and finally boarded a bus to my destination. As the bus pulled away, I let myself cry again, this time from the sheer relief of being safe. I hitchhiked one more time after that, but I was careful, sticking to crowded routes and daytime rides. Since then, I haven't done it again. The experience shook me, left a scar I'm still healing from. I need time before I feel comfortable on the road again, but I can't forget how beautiful hitchhiking can be, most of the time. Those 22 other rides, filled with kindness and connection, still hold a place in my heart. But that red van, that driver's smile, the slam of that door at the eco-village, they're a reminder that even in adventure, darkness can find you. I grew up in the countryside of Mississippi, in a quiet, sprawling area where the woods behind our house stretched out like a living, breathing entity. For Americans, picture a rural southern landscape, fields of cotton and corn, dirt roads, and dense forests that hum with life, from the chatter of cicadas to the rustle of deer. Our property sat on land, once part of a plantation, later a dairy farm that had long since faded into history. The woods were a constant in my childhood, a place of mystery and adventure, but also a source of strange, unexplained things I'd seen and heard since I was young. I've always been sharp, with a good memory and no history of mental illness, successful in school and later in college. I'm the middle child, often overlooked between my two siblings, but that's never dulled my awareness of the world around me. It was early spring of 2009, and I was about 17, a time when my sleep patterns were usually steady. But some nights, I'd wake up for no reason, restless and alert. This particular night, I jolted awake at exactly 3 a.m., my room bathed in the stillness of the Mississippi night. The air felt heavy, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, making every small sound feel amplified. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to will myself back to sleep, but a nagging unease kept me awake. By 3:15, something shifted. The stillness became oppressive, like the house was holding its breath. My room, on the second floor, had a window overlooking the woods, offering a clear view of the tree line and the local road beyond. It was a view I loved during the day, but at night, it felt like the forest was watching me back. Then it started, a sound from the woods, faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. It grew steadily, swelling into an uproar that made my heart pound. I knew the sounds of our woods, the sharp yowl of bobcats, the howling of coyotes, the crash of deer through the underbrush. I'd even heard a pack of coyotes baying under a full moon, a haunting but familiar chorus. But this was different. It was a cacophony of screams, rising from a single spot deep in the forest, like 1,000 voices crying out in torment. It wasn't just loud, it was anguished, a choir of pain and suffering that sent chills down my spine. It sounded human, but not quite, like something mimicking agony in a way no animal could. I leapt out of bed, my pulse racing, and ran to the window. The screams grew louder, more intense, as if whatever was out there was getting closer or more desperate. I pressed my face against the glass, scanning the darkness. The woods were pitch black, the trees swallowing any light from the distant road. I looked toward the local road, hoping to see headlights or some sign of human activity, maybe a car or a prankster, anything to explain it. But there was nothing, just the empty stretch of asphalt under the faint glow of a far-off street lamp. My hands shook as I lifted the window, the cool night air rushing in. The screams became even louder, filling the room, each one a stab of fear. It lasted for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 3 to 5 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, like the world had been drained of sound. I stood there frozen, my breath shallow, waiting for something, anything to break the quiet. Nothing came. My heart was still pounding as I climbed back into bed, pulling the covers tight around me, trying to convince myself it was just a dream or some trick of the night. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it was restless, haunted by the echo of those screams. The next morning, I couldn't shake the memory. Over breakfast, I asked my siblings if they'd heard anything strange in the night. My sister, who'd been up from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m., scrolling through her phone or reading, looked at me like I was crazy. I didn't hear a thing, she said, her tone dismissive. My brother shrugged, saying he'd slept through the night. Their nonchalance made it worse, like I'd imagined the whole thing. But I knew what I'd heard. Those screams weren't coyotes or bobcats or anything natural. They were something else, something that didn't belong in our woods. That night has stayed with me, creeping into my thoughts more often than I'd like. I've gone over it 1,000 times, trying to make sense of it, but it defies explanation. The woods behind our house, once a place of childhood adventures, now feel like a boundary I'm wary to cross. I've never heard anything like it since, but the memory is vivid, as raw today as it was back in 2009. I'm just glad there's a community out there to share this with, people who might understand the weight of hearing something so unnatural. Whatever was out there in the Mississippi woods that night, it wasn't human, and it wasn't animal. It was something else, and it still freaks me out to this day. I'm a 23-year-old guy living in a lively, medium-sized town in southern Italy, a place steeped in history but shadowed by a rough edge. For Americans, picture a sun-soaked Mediterranean town with ancient cobblestone streets and colorful buildings, but one where petty crime and local mafia influence are part of everyday life. My neighborhood is in the old part of town, a maze of narrow alleys built around a medieval core. A devastating earthquake in 1980 left much of it in ruins, making it affordable for families like mine to live here. Some streets are charming, with flower boxes and well-kept homes, while others are grittier, home to less savory characters. The town's castle, a looming stone fortress, has been repurposed as a prison for minor offenders, adding to the area's uneasy mix of beauty and tension. If you're smart and keep your head down, you can avoid trouble, but you're always aware it's there. This story happened in January 2025, a cold evening after a long day at university. My commute is a hassle, 20 minutes by car, but with unreliable public transport, it can take up to an hour and a half. I study in the university library until it closes at 6:30 p.m., so I usually get home around 8 p.m. or later. That night, I pulled into my street, exhausted but glad to be back. My 1-year-old Labrador, Maya, greeted me at the door, her tail wagging furiously. She's a sweetheart, full of energy and innocence, and her excitement always lifts my mood. I grabbed her leash, and we headed out for her evening walk, routine she loves, especially around the castle grounds where she can romp with other dogs. It was colder than usual, a rare snowy night in southern Italy, where snow is practically unheard of. For context, snow here is like a once-in-a-decade event, turning the town into a winter wonderland that feels magical but out of place. Maya was thrilled, bounding through the light dusting of snow, her paws kicking up flakes as she sniffed every corner. I was underdressed, wearing a thin jacket, and the chill was biting, so when Maya took longer than usual to do her business, I decided to head back home to grab a warmer coat. I wanted to make the most of the rare snow. Maybe take some photos of Maya playing in it. Our route home took us past an abandoned construction site, a skeletal structure of concrete pillars and unfinished floors that had been left to rot for years. Kids often played there, climbing the exposed beams or tagging the walls with graffiti, but at night, it was desolate, its dark silhouette looming against the snowy sky. As we approached, I noticed a man standing near the site, his back to me, his head tilted upward, staring at the first floor of the building. He wore a dirty beanie, a heavy winter jacket, and baggy tracksuit pants that seemed too big for his lean frame. He was perfectly still, like a statue, and something about his posture sent a shiver down my spine that wasn't from the cold. I stopped, my breath catching in the frosty air. Maya, usually friendly with everyone, tensed beside me, her fur bristling along her back as she stared at the man. She'd never reacted like this before, and her low, rumbling growl unnerved me. At first, I tried to dismiss it. Southern Italy has its share of odd characters, and I'd seen plenty of eccentric or troubled people wandering the streets. But as we started to pass by, Maya's growl deepened, her body rigid. The man turned, and my stomach dropped. His face was gone, with greasy hair spilling out from under his beanie and a scruffy, 3-day beard. His eyes were hollow, glinting in the dim streetlight. His expression was unsettlingly blank. He extended a hand toward Maya, his voice soft but creepy. "Hey, doggy, how cute are you?" The words were harmless, but the way he said them felt wrong, like a mask slipping. For a moment, I relaxed, thinking he might just be a harmless drifter, maybe someone with mental health issues. I knew a few locals like that, and they often looked similar, disheveled, lost in their own world. But then I heard it, a rustling sound from the first floor of the construction site. I glanced up, expecting to see a stray cat, but Maya didn't react the way she usually did when cats were around, with excited jumps and playful barks. Instead, she stayed locked on the man, her growl steady. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I saw her, a little girl about 10 years old, standing on a concrete slab above us. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, so desperate it hit me like a punch. I recognized her vaguely, probably one of the kids who played around the site during the day, maybe someone who'd seen me walking Maya before. She caught my gaze and mouthed the word help, her lips trembling. My heart raced as I turned back to the man, who was now staring at me, his blank expression replaced by something colder, more calculating. In that moment, I knew something was terribly wrong. He looked up at the girl, his voice eerily calm. "Calm down, sweetie. We need to get home. The food will be cold." The words were so rehearsed, so unconvincing, they sent a chill through me. I'm a big guy, 6 feet 2 inches and broad-shouldered, but I've never been in a fight, always preferring to keep the peace. Still, I couldn't walk away. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" I asked, trying to sound authoritative despite the fear clawing at my chest. "I'm her uncle," he said, his face deadly serious. "I need to get her home to eat." It was a lie so blatant it was almost insulting. The girl, seizing the moment, leaned over the edge of the platform and called out, "Hey, uncle, can you help me home? Mommy will get worried." Her voice was shaky but clever, playing along to get away from him. I saw my chance and moved under the platform, ready to catch her if she jumped. Maya's growling intensified, and then she barked a deep guttural sound I'd never heard from her before, nothing like her usual high-pitched yip. I turned, and my blood froze. The man's hand was behind his back, reaching for something, his eyes locked on me. I realized he might have a weapon, and panic surged through me. I'm no fighter, and if he had a knife, this could end badly. Maya's barking grew relentless, holding him at bay, and the girl took her chance. She leaned off the platform, and I caught her with one arm, my other hand gripping Maya's leash tightly. As she descended, I asked if she had a phone. No, she whispered, her voice on the verge of breaking. I unlocked my phone and handed it to her, urging her to call for help. To my shock, she took it and ran, sprinting down the street into the darkness. For a split second, I worried she'd stolen it. Petty theft isn't uncommon here, but that thought vanished when I turned back to the man. He was holding a knife, not a small pocket blade, but a large kitchen knife, the kind used for slicing bread, its blade glinting in the snow-reflected light. My heart stopped. Maya stood her ground, barking furiously, her 30 kilos of muscle refusing to budge as I tugged at her leash. The man started swinging the knife in the air, not advancing but gesturing wildly, his eyes empty and unreadable. I wanted to run, but I couldn't leave Maya behind. She'd get hurt if I did. And if I dragged her away, he might chase us. We were locked in a standoff, his knife slicing the air, Maya's barks echoing through the quiet street, and me frozen, my hands numb from the cold, the leash cutting into my palm. It felt like forever, though it was probably less than 2 minutes. I was sure someone nearby must have heard the commotion. Maya's barking was loud enough to wake the neighborhood, but no one came. The street stayed empty, the snow falling silently around us. Then heavy footsteps broke the silence, coming from the direction I'd walked. A group of men appeared, led by a burly figure I later learned was the girl's father, wielding a baseball bat. With them were other relatives and friends, their faces set with anger. The man with the knife saw them, and his demeanor shifted. He threw the knife at me, a clumsy toss that missed by a wide margin, but I still ducked instinctively. Then he lunged, not at me, but toward the street, trying to escape. Maya, bless her, leapt forward and bit his leg, tearing a chunk of his tracksuit. He barely flinched, shaking her off as he ran, the group of men in pursuit. They chased him down the street, but he was fast, slipping away into the night. The girl's father turned back to me, his bat still raised, his face red with fury. "Who the hell are you?" he shouted, advancing toward me. I held up my hands, pointing to the girl, who was now safe with her family. "I helped her," I said, my voice shaking. He didn't calm down until the girl ran to him, tugging at his arm, explaining that I'd saved her and given her my phone. His expression softened, and he lowered the bat, his shoulders sagging with relief. "I'm sorry," he said gruffly. "Thanks for helping my girl. Come to the house, have some coffee." After everything, I just wanted to get home, so I politely declined, my legs still trembling from adrenaline. I walked back with Maya, her tail wagging again, as if the danger had never existed. The snow had stopped, leaving a thin blanket over the streets, sparkling under the streetlights. The next morning, the police showed up at my door to take my statement. They showed me a book of photos, suspects they thought might match the man, but I didn't recognize anyone. They said he'd likely escaped and wasn't even local. His dialect and accent had been off, not quite matching the town's. Nothing came of it, and he was never caught. I know I could have handled things better. Maybe called the police sooner, or been less trusting, but I'm just glad the girl got away. Without Maya's instincts, or if I hadn't walked by at that moment, I don't want to think about where she'd be now. That night, southern Italy's charm felt tainted, but Maya's bravery and that girl's quick thinking reminded me there's still good in the shadows.